Okay, guys, so we're going to start now with, well, a portion of the opening act of the birthday party. And we're going to start with, first of all, the mise en scène and the setting that Petey uses, which is so distinctly different from Williams that it sets up a really excellent kind of potential for contrast for us. So we take a look at these opening setting directions. It's the living room of a house in a seaside town. A door leading to the hall down left, back door and small window up left. Kitchen hatch, centre back. Kitchen door up right. Table and chair centre. Petey enters from the door on the left with a paper and sits at the table. He begins to read. Meg's voice comes through the kitchen hatch. Now, one of the first things that you'll notice here is what we would say the generic nouns in Pinter's stage descriptions. They give us what would a kind of genre tension, a sense of tension between naturalistic realism and allegory. What you have to be aware of constantly in Pinter's plays is he seeks to fill our ordinary everyday world with kind of surrealist nightmares. And the stage directions, I think, capture a sense of everyday realism. This is not only a specific house in a specific seaside town, this is a house that could be in any of those locations. So it is both realistic and at the same time kind of generic and allegorical. It stands for ideas that represent all of humanity. And this is part of his overall intention to make the everyday a kind of nightmare, give us the absurd horror of everyday existence. So we have here the sense of what takes place as being nightmarishly surreal and entirely plausible and commonplace. And this is, I think, captures the essence of Pinter's drama, is that tension between surreal nightmare and everyday commonplace. What you see again in the descriptions is the absence of adjectives and imagery that you would see in Streetcar. You know, you think of that opening mise en scène from Williams that gives us this lyrical, emotional quality that reveals the symbolic function of each of the components in his scene setting. And, borrows figurative language, reads like a kind of lyrical text. And here, Pinter's couldn't be more contrasting. It's so stark and so generic and so commonplace at the same time that it's both utterly banal, completely everyday, and yet at the same time generic and transferable and universal and allegorical. So it has this quality of standing in for everyone's everyday existence at the same time as its surreal, nightmarish quality. Again, the naturalism that Pinter switches on like a tap is very evident in these opening directions for stage business. Petey enters from the door on the left with a paper and sits on the table. It's a completely mundane action that places us right at the opening of this play in an internal environment in the very most banal setting. And he reads, and his wife Meg's voice comes through the kitchen hatch. This couldn't be more realistic and plain. So we have what we'd say internal normalcy. We've got an internal scene in this opening mise en scène that is completely mundane, completely normal, and at the same time completely coherent. It's completely settled. It's settled, as we'll go on to see, in its absurdities, but it is settled nevertheless. And it's settled even with Stanley's involvement, and it's only the arrival of Goldberg and McCann that disrupts this settled pattern and almost ritualistic repetition that this life and setting has fallen into. Now, Meg and Petey open the play. Is that you, Petey? Petey, is that you? Petey, what? Is that you? Yes, it's me. Now, you would be, slightly hollow emotionally if you didn't find some of this ludicrous in its absurdity, but that's part of the way in which Pinter uses dialogue and language is to reveal actually the way in which the words that are being spoken are not so much there as a way of communicating. They're a way of shrouding fears. They're a way of keeping subtext beneath the surface. So language becomes this kind of shrouding mechanism, this masking form of communication that prevents people from being known. And we look at these questions here. The pauses, I think, give us this sense of a kind of isolation that Meg experiences, and that they simply punctuate this moment of isolation. So every time you have a pause in Pinter, there is something that is unspeakable being contained beneath the surface. And you'll see the move from ellipse, the three dots, to pause, to silence, in that order, creates a kind of spectrum of intensity, of repression, really, of repression and suppression, of keeping feelings contained and beneath the surface because they're unspeakable. And what we see, I think, in these pauses here is that actually the paranoia of isolation that's evident in the repetitive nature of these questions, these what we would call tautological questions, T-A-U-T-O, logical, that are completely redundant. She knows that it's highly likely that it's Petey. I mean, it's a perfectly reasonable thing to ask questions in this particular scenario because I guess it could be an intruder. But when she hears Petey's voice, she still insists on asking the question, is that you? Yes, it's me. So the dialogue itself is not so much filling a communicative function, it's filling an existential one. Meg is asking Petey questions because she feels isolated. There are attempts to reach out from her isolation. And Petey knows this subtext. But the answer actually reveals nothing. The answer actually reveals nothing in relation to the questions. What? He knows, he's aware that the questions are being asked purely as a way to overcome silence and isolation. And Meg says, is that you? Yes, it's me. There is a huge sense of understanding on Petey's behalf of Meg's intellectual limitations and the isolation that creates in her. So we've got possibilities here, for comparison. You can compare Meg's isolation with the isolation that Blanche experiences. You can also, I think, look at the dialogue between Meg and Petey through a similar lens as the dialogue between Blanche and Stella in that opening scene, as one of tension between the understanding and aware one and the deluded, isolated, alienated character. So we move on from this original opening dialogue. Again, a completely redundant question that Meg asks. What? Her face appears at the hatch. Are you back? Again, her question does not follow in the dialogue. It's illogical. It doesn't take place in a logical sequence because it doesn't follow from Petey's declaration of yes, it's me. What? She asks, which doesn't follow logically. Are you back? Of course, the fact that she's asking this and can see him through the hatch means that she knows the answer to this question. And what we see then is that language itself, in terms of effective communication, is redundant. And that actually the dialogue that they're undergoing here is an empty ritual enacted in order to overcome isolation and as a way of dealing with the sense of alienation and loneliness that is the fundamental kind of condition of human existence in absurdist drama. That this ritualistic dialogue is actually hollow as a communicative experience. It's not about connecting people in a meaningful way. It's about shrouding the reality of alienation that sits beneath the text. She follows. I've got your cornflakes ready. She disappears and reappears. Here's your cornflakes. Again, the repetitions in her dialogue, I think, are designed to kind of prevent further questions. It's designed to shut down any further dialogue about what her concerns are. So again, this is another one of Pinter's statements about language being concealing more than it reveals. here, her statements are designed to cut short their dialogue and to cut short the interrogation and the possibility of formulating meaning. Petey rises and takes the plate from her, sits at the table, props up the paper and begins to eat. Meg enters by the kitchen door. And then we have more. Are they nice? Very nice. I thought they'd be nice. You got your paper? Yes. So, again, the repetition between the two seems to be a moment of kind of coherence and concordance between the two, of harmony. Are they very nice? Are they nice? Very nice. The agreement that those statements seem to construct actually creates, I think, a sense of distance and a conflict of vision between them. Because what we see in Meg's question is someone who is asking the question purposefully, not because they're really interested in the actual answer, but because the question themselves gives them the appearance of interacting with humans and formulating meaning. She doesn't really care about the answer, and Petey understands this. Petey is a tolerant, understanding character. He gets that that's what Meg is after, and I think the repetition gives us a suggestion of this. He doesn't simply say yes, he says very nice as well, and this is slightly more extensive and makes it even less likely that there'll be room for Meg to follow that initial question with further interrogation about the nature of his cornflakes. And you see that when she repeats the statement, I thought they'd be nice. Again, her statement reveals that her initial question was almost pointless in its existence. So Petey's understanding here of her and his tolerance is evident in that very simple language that he responds to her questions with. You got your paper. Again, there's a ritual performance going on here, I think, to mask emptiness. And she's engaging in a type of role-playing here that is constructing the role, I think, of an attendant wife. She's playing the role of an attendant wife rather than actually engaging with the experience itself. So there's a sense of ritual here, of repetitive behaviour that's actually shrouding shrouding the reality of the emotional experience of the characters, and actually creating distance or suggesting distance more than intimacy itself. So isolation and alienation is the kind of pre-condition of a lot of Pinter's dialogue. So this follows. Meg asks about the paper. Is it good? Not bad. What does it say? Nothing much. You read me out some nice bits yesterday. Yes, well, I haven't finished this one yet. Will you tell me when you come to something good? Now, one of the important things to note about this that I think is comparable to Streetcar is the feminine reliance on male vision for producing a vision of reality, producing something, producing an understanding. We could compare this sort of situation in the dialogue, I think, with Stella's interactions with Stanley in the opening scene. Kind of happiness in that passive role that she adopts with him, in that sense of passivity. The language that Meg uses is also highly generic. We've got good, bad, it, say. We've got the most generic type of vocabulary being used here. And I think that absence of adjectives gives us, again, her sense of a lack of vision or intelligence. That we've got only the crudest set of binaries with which she can judge behaviour and judge what's going on. And again, what's revealed here is her inability to encounter meaning, to construct meaning, and to see the world clearly for what it is. And that, I think, prepares us for a character like Stanley, who very much does see the world for what it is, but is inert and incapable of reacting to the nature of existence, whereas Meg is nothing more really than a collection of instincts. When Meg asks, what does it say? And Stanley says, nothing much. It seems to be that he's simply bored and uninterested in the contents of the paper, but he still persists in reading it and finding it interesting. Partly what that reveals is how banal he finds these dialogues and how tolerant he is of this particular situation, but also what it tells us is that he perhaps understands her limitations and hasn't yet encountered something that he knows that she's going to be able to engage with, and that he is regulating that experience for her. So he does have a sense of understanding, he does have a sense of tolerance and of interpersonal intelligence. So there is really, in the Meg Petey dialogue, Petey is very much in the stellar type role, in a position of understanding, dealing with a human being of a kind of striking lack of self-awareness and interpersonal intelligence. Meg asks, "Will you tell me when you come to something good?" Petey says, "Yes," and there's a pause. Now again, what you see, I think, in that pause is Petey's awareness of their disparity, their unevenness. There's a sense of their distance in that pause there, because he knows ultimately that he's not going to find a great deal for her to engage with. There's subtext always in the silences in Pinter. Meg says, "Have you been working hard this morning?" Again, the question itself is what we would call, these are the worst type of questions for teachers to ask, that have a simple yes or no answer, because they don't really reveal anything about the person answering them. They shut down further communication. And Petey seems aware of this because he goes beyond it. He does provide the simple, "No, just stacked a few of the old chairs, cleaned up a bit." That closed question that you see there, he goes beyond that and furthers a little bit more dialogue, because he knows that that's what will produce the kind of illusion of intimacy. Meg moves on. "Is it nice out?" "Very nice." Another pause. Now, Petey is again working against these closed questions, because he could simply respond, yes, it is nice out, thank you, or no, it's not. So he's working against the closed questions here. But the pause, I think the subtext there is the contrast with inside. Yes, it is very nice out, and it's not particularly in here. So we've got, again, another tension in the mise en scène. That there's something unbelievably kind of stifling and claustrophobic about the setting in this play, that I think in some ways the opposite of what happens in Streetcar. Streetcar is unsettling because inside and outside have fragile boundaries between them. The apartment and the context of the Vieux Carré, the working class neighborhood in New Orleans that surrounds them, is permeable. Whereas here the boundary is incredibly stark, and ironically inside, where we have close quarters and intimacy, is precisely where alienation is experienced the most profoundly. Meg says, "Is Stanley up yet?" And this is where the dialogue changes in tack. This is where we kind of move, I think, slightly away from these kind of empty gestures, this ritual of intimacy that both husband and wife perform, and really gives us a chance to see Meg focusing on really what she is concerned by, and that is Stanley. So, is Stanley up yet? I don't know. Is he? Again, Petey just responds to this in a tolerant fashion. I don't know, is he? It shows that he understands her fascination with him, that is maternal. He knows that there is a maternal fascination on Meg's part towards Stanley, and that he's tolerant of this. He's tolerant of this, even though, at times this fascination seems bizarre and slightly problematic. Well, more than slightly problematic. And this dialogue that follows is meant to sound quite ludicrous. I don't know. I haven't seen him down yet. Well, then he can't be up. Haven't you seen him down? I've only just come in. He must still be asleep. So we've got these inaccurate binaries that are being established through this sort of play, this riffing on up and down, in and out. These very simple opposites that in this case seem ludicrous because they don't accurately correspond to what's being spoken about. Meg can't tell whether he's up because she hasn't seen him down yet. There's an illogical closing down of those binaries at the level of language, because they seem utterly ludicrous. They're inaccurate binaries that don't correspond clearly to the meaning that they're trying to establish. And again, what that constructs is communicative distance. They're not on the same page, literally, in the language that they're using. I think confuses more than it clarifies. Haven't you seen him down? She's aware that the question is pointless again. I've only just come in. So there's I think, an indirect response here that, Petey doesn't respond to her question of haven't you seen him down with, something that he would be entitled to, was to say, well, of course I haven't, you moron. I've only just walked in through the door. He just simply says, I've only just come in, which indirectly reveals the stupidity of the previous question. And again, that the questions are simply being asked in order to establish a false sense of intimacy and of familiarity, and perhaps to establish a kind of false sense of family that doesn't exist for them. So again, the falsity of this language and its communicative failure, I think, reveals a great deal about the alienation between human beings and the way that language serves to isolate people much more than it serves to connect them and to create emotional intimacy between the two.